OK, let's start the hour by hearing more about the COVID pandemic and the lockdown effects from Bev Turner. Bev questioned the narrative throughout. I watched Bev from the very beginning being very outspoken, and I was cheering at the screen quite often because she was saying out loud what was going on in my head. And Bev received quite the backlash for so doing. Look at this.
Why are you so sceptical about the whole thing?
99.8% because of the facts. 99.8% survival rate from COVID-19. The average age of death is 82. This was a virus that was and remains.
Not care about this.
Exactly that.
No,
This is the language.
It's the language. Of course we do. But we should always have looked after those people. We should always have looked after those people.
Yeah, we're not in that situation, though. We're not there now.
And now we're talking, just to steer it back, we're supposed to be talking about NHS workers.
We have given them the jab, but that...
Bev, how does it feel watching that? I think it's from 2021.
I just want to sort of give that woman a massive hug because she was, like, desperately trying to get this information out. And I mean, I sort of find it quite funny now. You know, we're sat so far apart on the sofa and so much of the theatre of that time is so obvious. It was so obvious to me at the time, but now it just looks comedy. It was... Just to put it into some sort of context, I was just a journalist and I was doing a lot of the rent-a-gob stuff on those shows. At the time, I'd do the press review on daytime telly. And this happened, this pandemic, and I just started researching the facts. I didn't have to look very far to realise that what the vast majority of the information we were being given was emotion-led rather than data-driven. And I found myself on the sofa that day, and we were talking then about the vaccine mandates for NHS workers. And it was so obvious to me, as I said there, that you're asking healthy, young, predominantly women in that arena to take an injection with no long-term data. That was all I was ever really saying, and said, therefore, you had to balance the risk versus the benefit. And it felt like I was sat there going, the sun is in the sky, and everyone's going, no, 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 the sun is not in the sky. It's like, the sun is in the actual sky. No, 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 I think you'll find if you look out of the window, the sun is not in the sky. And I felt like this stranger in a strange land for so much of the time. But I was in a luxurious position in that I didn't have an obligation to a channel. And I look at that now, you know, Dermot was looking after his job, Alison's looking after a job, Matthew was, I guess, just much less easy to excuse because he was in the same position as me. And so I know they were in a difficult position. I've never received any sort of public apology from anybody, and I don't need it.
Where and why? Why do you think there was this enthusiastic cheerleading of restrictions that damaged everyone's lives, restricted everyone's lives, and people must have seen the effect they were having on everyone's children, even if they didn't have children of their own?
I think the answer to that is different for every single person and depending on the benefits therein for them. And it only really takes a convergence of benefits from a few people to suddenly the momentum for this extraordinary event in time to pick up speed until the minority are saying the sun is in the sky and the majority saying, no, I think you'll find it isn't. So I think everybody has, like I say, everybody at that time had different motivations for wanting these to continue. And, of course, a daytime show like this morning had record viewing figures. They'd never known anything like it. Everyone sat at home, you know, playing on their phones and watching telly. So, of course, it was in the interest of those media outlets just keep this going.
This is really all about reflecting on what happened to children. It seems to me there's been no accountability. There's been no apology. And that for the kids, for children, it's almost as though it isn't over.
You know, I think if you ask my kids, would you like there to be another lockdown? Of course they would say, yes, Mummy, we would love that, because no child particularly wants to go to school. But, of course, it isn't good for them, in the same way that sitting at home and eating Haribo for dinner isn't good for them. There's things that, as adults, we stop children from doing. And I think what I see now in my kids, so I've got a 14, 12-year-old girls, my son is now 20. The two that are still at school, the gaps in their knowledge is extraordinary. The gaps in their maths, their history, their geography, their basic stuff they just don't know. And I'm lucky. I can pay a tutor to plug those gaps should the time come at GCSEs. So many families are not in that fortunate position. And when the lockdowns happened and the schools were closed, it was almost as though it was done on the assumption that every household is happy, every family is united, the parents have got the time to sit around and make sourdough bread and play in the garden. And I remember being in that situation, and I am lucky in that my house is happy. I wasn't baking sourdough bread, but I was trying to do the work that I was doing, writing and doing some presenting still for the short period of time I was allowed to down the lens. But my children were missing out on so much. It was so obvious to me that those children who were in houses that weren't like ours were going to be really struggling. And Great Ormond Street had a shocking statistic of head trauma going up by over 1,000% in children, just in houses where the parents had just lost it because they were obviously stressed, scared, lack of purpose, lack of money for some people.
Ralph, do you think there is a sense for children, from the children's point of view, of a part of the story that was never written for them? You know, they saw all these things happen. Some of these things happened to them. You know, their truncated education, potentially limited, opportunities and ambitions later on. But they were just left hanging. No one's ever come to children and said, sorry, or mistakes were made, or this should never have happened to you.
Yeah, that's true, but I think we make the same mistakes in other areas as well. And the issue sometimes I feel is we live supposedly in a very data-driven period. But with COVID, like, nobody said, OK, different groups should be treated differently. Like, as you said before, there are different conditions for an 81-year-old than conditions for a 2-year-old or a 14-year-old. But the idea was, no, there must be one blanket rule, the same for everyone. Basically, everybody had to succumb to whatever government decision that was made.